Society, African journalists condemn media outlets for using images of black people in coverage of US-UK monkeypox outbreaks. Coming up on the program, we take a look at how the media portrays Africa when covering African stories. And SA media groups demand that Google and Facebook pay them for news content. And we ask, where do you get your news from in this digital age? Well, hello and welcome to Media and Society on SABC News, independent and impartial. My name is Naledi Moleo. Now, this is where we look at the intersection between media and audiences. And of course, this show is really not complete without your say. So connect with us via our social media channels and share your views and concerns about how the media works and what it is that we feed you. Our hashtag on Twitter is hashtag SABC Media and Society, or write this down because you might want to be part of the conversation and give us a call later. The number is 011-714-6841 or 011-714-6842. In the year 2000, The Economist magazine had a cover that referred to Africa as the hopeless continent. Well, in 2011, they had changed their view and their cover said Africa Rising. Interestingly enough, Time magazine also had the Africa Rising cover, using those exact words. Over time, many have complained about coverage of Africa, here in Africa and abroad, as being too negative. Well, we went to find out what some of you think about the media's coverage of our continent.
Is actually failing us as a continent and also our own kids, because right now our own kids use the mentality of Western, and of which is wrong. We don't need Western culture in our land. We just need African stories for African people. Whatever they do, they portray as if Western land is the one that is special.
They are not telling the story accurately or properly. They tell the story based on hearsay. Most times they've not been around Africa to really see how the people operate culturally, mentally, religiously and otherwise.
It's actually giving everyone freedom of expression. You see, it's portraying like there's no racism, there's no what you can call homophobia or gender-based thing, but you can tell that it's 100% perfect in the sense that everyone is given a right to express their feelings regardless of where you're coming from.
They must keep a balance, because we are here in Africa. They must try to put maybe 60% or 70% African stories, then 30% then the Western stories, you see, because now the world is one. We are not denying that the world is one, but let the media try to balance and push more African stories better, more African, make it a balance at least. That 60% or 40% Western, 60%, the highest percent should be African stories, should be told.
Normally, I'm not really happy about the way, because normally you see, they don't even speak the truth. There are things that they are true that they're supposed to say, but they won't say it. They will hide it at the back because it's African.
Our viewers even given us a quota there on how much African stories we should be covering. But let's get into a topic that has really gotten a lot of us talking, particularly in the past week. Cases of monkeypox are rising in the US and in Europe. Now, media in those regions are choosing photographs of what you see on the screen there, seemingly black African hands and other body parts, to tell that story. The Foreign Press Association of Africa has complained about this. But could this be the continuation of a negative story about Africa that many have said is prevalent? This, despite the fact that rising cases of monkeypox aren't even in Africa. It is Africa Month and Africa Day in a few days. So let's really get into this conversation of how we tell the African story. Remember, be part of the chat as well. Give us a call on 011-714-6841 or 6842. On Twitter, hashtag SABC Media and Society. Joining me to cover this conversation is Africa, on the coverage of Africa rather, is Professor Mpofu from the University of Limpopo. And then we're also joined by Mr. Kennedy Wandera from the Foreign Press Association of Africa. He's joining us from Nairobi in Kenya. Gentlemen, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Kennedy, I'd like to start with you, my brother joining us all the way from Nairobi, Jambo, firstly. And then you, as the Foreign Press Association, have raised this issue about how monkeypox is being covered and it's seemingly black bodies that are being used to portray it. Let's start with your starting argument. What caught your attention and what did you do?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. What caught our attention is the actually the way they were explaining it, the reason why they were using black images on a disease that they call as an outbreak in the North America as well as the Europe. So we thought we needed to seek clarification from them why they are doing that. But now the excuse they were giving is that there are no more photos or images from Europe or the North America, and those that are available from Democratic Republic of Congo and the West Africa. That is a very lazy explanation, because why should you be talking about North America or Europe and then using pictures from Africa to depict a disease? And we are saying this is a continuation of the behavior of perpetuating negative stereotypes about Africa, and we say this is no. Let someone else do it, but not the media, because media has a role to bridge this.
Yeah, Professor Mpofu, your thoughts when you saw the images of monkeypox, particularly being portrayed by black African bodies, with a disease that's seemingly growing in other parts of the world instead?
Yeah, but it's not surprising, really, especially for some of us who've studied media representation in the global media for a long time. You would know in 2010, for instance, BBC ran very negative stories about South Africa during the World Cup, telling its readers that matches are likely going to start late because of typical African chaos. And BBC did a documentary in 2019 again called Congo, the Heart of Africa. And it's an extract really from David Conrad's Heart of Darkness, where they speak about Ebola land, African chaos and stuff. And when the monkey pox comes up, really the imagination of Africans as monkeys actually strikes in most of these media organizations, to an extent that the only representation that they can get, or the only imagery that they can use for their stories, is the one that depicts black people, because they've been for a long time been imagined as monkeys. And therefore this disease is associated with the black people, and the imagery that is used at the end of the day actually fits the stereotypical imagination of Africa and of blacks as vectors of diseases, as carriers of diseases, and probably as the originators, as it were, of any other pandemic that is expected in the world, and not anything that, and not that the pandemics could come from the global north, as it were. Yeah. So it's not surprising, but still at the same time it's problematic.
I want to sit with this one a little bit, because we need to obviously start expanding to the discussion around Africa Rising and the bigger discussions that we have around the continent. But I want to sit with the monkeypox issue for a little bit, because one could easily argue that it doesn't really matter the race of the images that we're showing when we have the conversation around monkeypox. So, Kennedy, if I come to you and I say, why does it matter that they're using black bodies when the argument is they couldn't find other images, but they need to raise awareness about this growing disease? Why is it important?
It is important to use, you see now here, we have stock images, and they are readily available. But look at what is being told. Whenever you are going to a hospital and you don't have photos of these patients, then it is advisable that you use electron micrographs. Yeah, they are readily available. Look at COVID-19. what kind of electron micrograph have we been using in media, on TVs? Which ones? Yeah, we've been using microcellular structures to depict COVID-19 on our TV bulletins, yeah? So why then should you go, in the absence, you are telling us here that you do not have photos from Europe, or you do not have photos from North America, but now you have the convenience of using photos from DRC and West Africa because you believe that's where this disease is. We are not saying it's not there, and we're not saying it is wrong using photos, but use photos from those photos to depict what's happening in that particular area. If you're talking about Democratic Republic of Congo, or you're talking about Cameroon for this instance, then use photos from Cameroon, because you have never seen any African media, or even in media, using police brutality, for instance, in South Africa or in Kenya, to show what is happening in the US or in UK.
Right.
You've never seen African media use photos from Israel.
Let me come in there. Let me come in there.
Police brutality.
But let's quickly continue with our discussion. We're still in conversation with Kennedy Wandera from the Foreign Press Association of Africa, as well as Professor Shepherd Mpofu from the University of Limpopo. And we're talking about how Africa is covered in the media, particularly in the international media, with the example of monkeypox being really at the center of this discussion, where we saw this week the spread of the disease being discussed across the world, but the images of African bodies being used to portray the illness. So, Prof, if I come back to you and I say, well, surely there's some control that we should be having here, right? That perhaps there's a role that African media in and of itself can play in really starting to shape how we tell the African story. What is our responsibility here at home? Professor Mpofu?
The media remains largely sort of responsible for the way that it represents even communities within the countries, within the African continent, because we know there are also disparities in terms of coverage. But also it's important in the case of the monkeypox that, you know, the African media should actually stand up and speak up and challenge some of these misrepresentations in the global north of the African continent. Of course, we know that there have been cases of monkeypox in the DRC, in Nigeria, and the like. But the exaggeration that in the West is most likely to be black people who have it is quite problematic. You know, and we need a narrative from the African continent or from African journalists that rails against these misrepresentations and the undermining or the dehumanization of Africans in the process.
We're going to be celebrating Africa Day this week on the 25th of May, and as we make that observation, one wonders what the tone of that day is really going to be. A little bit earlier, I talked about how The Economist back in the year 2000, 22 years ago, wrote a headline that said Africa was the hopeless continent. Have we started to change that narrative? That's the real question. And what does that message really look like now? I mean, there was a time when we said Africa rising. We went from the hopeless continent to Africa rising. What's the wording that you're expecting to be hearing on the 25th of March, Kennedy? 25th of May?
Yeah, and Naledi, you speak to core issues that everybody needs to be talking about, because there have been those arguments that Africa is not writing well about itself, and someone else is going to take that opportunity to write about Africa. So I think these conversations matter. We need to talk more about the continent, and like what we are doing here. At the Foreign Press Association Africa, we bring all journalists who work and cover Africa for the international media on the continent and outside the continent. And sometimes there have been allegations being thrown against the Europe or the US that they are writing negative stories about Africa. But we chose to also look upon ourselves, because we who work for the international media are the ones writing these stories for them. So we just need to look at ourselves in the eye why are we writing so negative stories about our continent when we are bashing the international media for writing these stories? So this kind of conversation that we are having is very essential, because we believe there are many aspects of the continent that we can put into focus. Look at the rich tradition that we have from South Africa to the Nigeria, Democratic Republic of Congo, Kenya, and Uganda. Look at the rich tourism that we have. We are seeing many people coming from the West, from the East, and even the Americas to Africa to just look at the beautiful scenery that is in Africa. Yeah. So when we have these kind of conversations that are taking place on 25th, there is need for us to look at ourselves in the eye. Like Prof has said here, one of the problems that we have with the African media is, I don't know, the kind of the way we look at ourselves. We look at ourselves in an inferior way. The kind of stories, because we are seeing these stories. Some of these organizations also partnering the international media, but they just take it as gospel truth. Yeah, I think it's a time we also just need to look at what we are doing and question ourselves whether we are doing the right thing. And these conversations are very important, because Africa can never just be a continent of disease, poverty, and conflict. There are many things that are taking place on the continent that we just also need to focus on. Yeah. And that's what we're actually doing.
You used an interesting word earlier, Kennedy. You said that the response to the pictures that were used to depict monkeypox, you said was a lazy response when they said that they couldn't find better images of monkeypox. I want to sit with that, because one can easily argue that even in how we tell African stories, that perhaps even as ourselves, as our own storytellers, have to some extent gotten quite lazy and just relied on the imagery and the words that are used to portray us as a continent. So Professor Mpofu, perhaps I give this big duty to you and I say, what are the other words that we can be using? I mean, we showed earlier that 2 magazines used Africa Rising because there really wasn't much that they could work with, I suppose, but there was that repetition of where Africa's going. What words would you use in 2022 Africa Day?
It's extremely difficult for me to actually imagine a much more positive coverage of Africa, mostly as an academic and definitely from journalists, where you have elections being stolen, where you have violence in most countries, and you have, for instance, we can take the example of Zimbabwe up north. A coup happens, nothing is said in the strongest sort of activist terms against that coup by the leaders, and also you have a situation where elections are stolen. Sorry for that, you know, I'm in the meeting. Where elections are stolen, and definitely, if the politics is not properly done, what you have at the end of the day is a sort of poverty, people migrating, issues of violence and the like. So we definitely are not at a point to have more than maybe 60% of positive stories about Africa. But definitely there are positive stories of humanity that we have in Africa. There are positive stories of economies rising in Africa. There are positive stories of our business people actually doing well globally and in our continent that need to be spoken about. And that inspiration needs to be put out there to young people, that they can also do these things, or that they can also impact their economies positively.
Okay.
But definitely there are cases of Africa rising in some cases of the continent. And also there are cases of Africa decline in some cases of our continent, where brutalities happen, where human rights are undermined, where elections are stolen, where economies are actually undermined by the leadership. And even in some cases where regional bodies are silent about certain things that matter. SADC is silent about things that matter. ECOWAS is silent about things that matter in some context.
Right.
So we need a balanced approach from our journalists in that regard. We're not calling for a sunshine journalism where we say everything is positive in Africa. No, let's present the positives, yes, but let's also present the negatives with similar passion, especially from journalists.
But I mean, I think it's perhaps it's not so easy to find the right words, because you started there with a lot of negativity, and we did enjoy that interruption by your young daughter there, bringing us some light on this grey morning. Kennedy, I see you laughing as he started, because he did struggle to find the words of how we portray a better Africa in Africa Day 2022. I saw you laughing. Do you have examples? Is it that difficult to tell a positive African story?
No, it's not difficult to tell a positive story, but like Prof says, sometimes you struggle. You struggle when you expect a democratic regime in Africa, but people steal elections and brutalize opponents. That is a story that gets outside there, because we are not detached from the global north. So in the global south, we just need to put our house in order and make things moving, because we have challenges. But again, in the midst of challenges, there is always rays of hope, and we must also capitalize on this. For instance, on the continent, a lot of things have happened. Actually, this week, I think someone somewhere is trying to dissuade us away from what's happening. Look. Now, World Cup is happening in Qatar, but for the first time, we are having the first female Black African referee. Yeah, and we've been celebrating this. This has never happened. But now someone comes here with monkeypox and then just takes away our excitement. Yeah. So there are things, there are positive things that are happening on the continent, and I think we just need to keep on telling more of these, because they are there.
Well,
and also look at what happened in Rwanda at the basketball tournament.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I'd love to hear more of those examples of what are the positive African stories that we can tell. I think first about the Africa Free Trade Agreement, and there's something to celebrate in 2022. Africa is starting to do more and more business with each other. But thank you so much to our guests, Professor Mpofu from the University of Limpopo, and also Mr. Kennedy Wandera, all the way from Nairobi in Kenya. And he's, of course, representing the Foreign Press Association of Africa.